On this episode, TJ sends in a follow-up on his extension tube story and how he solved it. We'll take a look into SpaceX and how they make use of cameras. And Doug had a creative experience with fireworks and wonders if there are more creative things you can do with photography. This is Tips from the Top Floor, episode 775 for May the 4th, 2017.
Tips from the top floor, tips from the top, alright, from the top floor.
Hello, Chris. Greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is TJ Tatlow. You aired my question yesterday or last week about the macro extension tubes. Just wanted to give you an update on that. The issue that I found out was that, unlike Canon, Nikon lenses default to being closed down as opposed to being wide open. And so that just proved to be unusable with those non-CPU macro extension tubes. With that computer lens, there's just no way you can do macro at like f12. The solution I found, just as you said last week, is to use a lens with a manual aperture ring, and I was able to get a hold of a beautiful 135mm f2.8 lens from back in the 70s. It did have that manual aperture ring, so I could actually control the aperture even though I was using those non-CPU extension tubes, and it works just fine. So thank you so much for taking my question, and really enjoy your show.
Thanks, TJ. Thanks for the follow-up. Yeah, you know, that's something I didn't know. I know that Canon lenses, the quote digital ones, are all open. The aperture is all open when they are not powered. And there's a trick that sometimes, I'm not sure I should recommend it, but sometimes photographers put on that on the digital camera, and then they change the aperture. They press the aperture preview button. What's that English term for that? I don't even know. That's I think the depth of field preview button that snaps the aperture into the size that you put in the dial, and then while you hold this, you take the lens off, and then it keeps that setting. And again, I think it's not recommended because for some electrical reasons. So don't if you break your lens, don't make me responsible for it. And Nikon apparently, as you just said, has it all closed when it's not powered. So that's, yeah, Nikon, Canon are kind of very different in some respects. I just recently had to shoot with a Nikon. Well, I had the pleasure to shoot with a Nikon because I'm not very emotional about my digital cameras, to be honest. But one thing that always gets me is that Nikon has their threads for the lens just the other way around. So taking off that lens cap on the back of the lens is like, I always go like, oh, this is broken. Oh no, it goes the other way. Yeah, anyway, doesn't matter. So it's different, and I'm very glad that the fallback to using a manual lens works for you. The manual thing always works. That's why sometimes the good old film cameras are just nicer to handle, because you kind of know what to do, because they are mechanical and they are, for most people, easier to understand. And I will later in the show talk a bit about something else that I do with lenses, with mechanical lenses, where I don't even use tubes, but they're still not connected to the camera. Well, let's talk about space. I must admit I'm a bit of a space geek. I don't know about you, but I know that a lot of people dealing with photography are come from the technical side. So I guess there is a higher percentage of people interested in this kind of stuff among the listeners of this show. And I keep following this, and maybe it has, I don't know if it has to do with my date of birth, because I was born pretty much the same month the moon landing happened. And okay, now I have completely dated myself. That's how old I am. But I'm interested in what's going on, and of course I have an eye on SpaceX and what they are doing. And if I can make time, I watch their launches, and they do a really good job. They do an amazing job making this accessible to people. So I've watched the last Falcon 9 launch that happened. I don't know. It's Thursday, the 4th of May when I'm recording this. Yeah, a week ago maybe. And they're of course known for returning their first stages to Earth now. So and they've been better and better about this. I know the initial ones, the footage of those things crashing was interesting. They're also known for doing this great job making their launches accessible for everyone. They do live webcasts. They have presenters that do a good job explaining what's going on. They have good graphics explaining things. But of course, given that this is 2017, they also employ lots of cameras, lots of camera technology, both on the ground, but also hooked up to the rockets with live feeds to Earth, which in itself is not easy. And with the launch of the latest Falcon 9, they've outdone themselves again in terms of visuals, at least in my book, because, that first stage went to, I think the separation was somewhere in the range of at least 100 kilometers high up. And then, and that's not straight above where they're shooting from. That's diagonally, so you have to add some on top of that. And then it goes through these stages to come back down to Earth. And it'll like fire its boosters to slow down and sometimes even to turn around. And then it kind of, in a controlled fashion, falls down to Earth. And it burns its boosters once more, what they, I think, call the re-entry burn, to slow it down before it hits the atmosphere so it doesn't get damaged from that. And then they have these thrusters, I think it's nitrogen thrusters that keep it stable. You can see those white puffs of gas nudging it in the right directions. And then they have these steering paddles on the rockets that look a bit like waffle irons. And right before the landing, they then do the landing burn, and then it touches down. And and if it works well, if it turns out well, it just stands there, a rocket landing. I mean, for me, that still blows my mind. It's an amazing feat. And of course, it has to do with all the advances that we've seen over the last years in sensor technology, in manufacturing. I mean, they even 3D print parts that couldn't be manufactured any other way. And of course, advances in camera technology, and especially miniaturization. And I mean, believe it or not, action cameras, the ones that you go out to a shop to strap onto your to skateboard, those play an important role there now. In fact, their first and second stage cameras that you see footage from are GoPros. Yes, they're just GoPros. I mean, okay, they modify them a bit. They put them in special rugged housings so they don't just melt the plastic cases. But yeah, there's information about that out there. Actually, photos out. I'm gonna link to those in the show notes. And I mean, get this. Just, I don't know. It blows my mind. They take consumer grade hardware and use it to bring compelling video to Earth. I find this amazing. They could, of course, use this much more expensive specialized camera solutions. Those are out there. You can buy them for a lot of money. But instead, they go for the cheaper option and just deploy a few more of them because they can. And I don't know. I personally also come from that. From that, I don't know. I think I personally, in my development, I come from a similar area. Now, I don't launch rockets into space, but when I started media production, I came from a home recording background. I came from non-pro equipment and made it because that was at the verge of this stuff becoming accessible for everyone. So I used some of the stuff that the pros wouldn't even look at, but I achieved good results because I knew how to work that equipment. I knew my way around it, and it pretty much launched my career into media production. So that really is, I guess that's one of the reasons I really like this. And SpaceX also has GoPros attached to the fairings, which are the covers around the payload. And if possible, those get retrieved after they fell back down to Earth, and there's sometimes even footage from them online. I'm going to link to a YouTube video that they put up with one of these fairings kind of starting to fall back to Earth, and I find this cool. Now, interestingly enough, and that's something that was different this time, during the previous launches, we used to see video mostly from the onboard cameras. And then when the start, of course, from Earth, shot from Earth. And then when it returned, you would see some footage from down there. But you would typically see footage from those onboard cameras with all all the problems, like there were interruptions. It's kind of hard to keep a stable enough radio signal with all else that's going on. Like there's telemetry, the increasing distance at the launch. They have to keep that signal going, the massive vibrations during a launch, the interference of other radio signals, and so on. It's hard. It's not easy. But this time around, everything seemed to be ideal, and especially the visibility was great. So they could see all this from the ground now. And they followed the first stage through pretty much the entire cycle, the entire like launch cycle, and then its return to Earth and the re-entry burn and the landing from Earth. And again, that blew my mind. I found it truly amazing how stable that live footage was. If you've seen that, you might have noticed, I mean, given that you need to track that tiny, tiny thing, well, it's not that tiny, it's like 70 meters, 90 meters high, but still, I mean, at that distance, that is tiny. If you've got to have a very steady hand, right? If you've shot a very long lens, like let's say you have tried to handhold a 300 or a 500 unstabilized lens, you will agree that it's awfully hard to handhold that. And even with a tripod, it's not easy. If you have a 500 milliliter lens, I'm thinking of drinking here. 500 millimeter lens. You step on the ground next to the tripod, and there's a good chance you'll see the motion in the camera. And given the size of the Falcon 9 and the distance they shot at, they must have been far beyond that 500 millimeter range. In fact, we talked about this on Happy Shooting, my German podcast, and my co-host did the math and ended up somewhere in the range of probably 1,000 millimeter or more. That's not a telephoto lens, that's a telescope. And it needs to have the hell stabilized out of it just to make sure this works. And they did this not in post, they did this live. And of course, it's very likely this was not manually guided. It probably automatically some server-driven system, maybe even automatic tracking built in. I don't really know that. I don't really know what they actually used for that. But anyway, I find it amazing. And if you or anyone else listening to this show knows what they do, what they use there, hey, let me know. I'm very, very curious. Let me say a quick thank you to this week's sponsor. Are you looking to sharpen your photography skills or learn a new technique? Skillshare is an online learning community with over 15,000 classes in photography, design, and a lot more. Whether you're a professional photographer looking to give your work an extra edge, a freelancer who wants to attract more clients and build your brand, or a hobbyist learning to build your skills, Skillshare is the perfect way to do so. Take classes on everything from composition to advanced Photoshop from teachers with years of experience, including notable photographers such as Treshant, Chris Burkhardt, or Andre Wagner. And I can tell you it's easy to use and the content is really great. If you've watched my videos on YouTube, you know I did this one on food photography in a restaurant. So I've looked at Daniel Krieger's Skillshare class about exactly that, food photography in a restaurant. And not only is it really well produced, I also learned new angles that I didn't even think about before. All around, a great experience with classes on everything: editing, street, portrait, outdoor, even mobile photography. Plus, you get unlimited access to all of Skillshare's classes for one low monthly cost. Never pay per class again. So, Skillshare is giving you, the Tips from the Top Floor listeners, a month of unlimited access absolutely free. Just go to Skillshare.com/tips to redeem your free month. That's Skillshare.com/tips. Skillshare.com/tips. And I really thank them for the support.
Hi Chris, this is Doug from Cincinnati. I had an interesting event where I was going to take pictures of fireworks, but I forgot my tripod. I almost did not get my camera out because I didn't have my tripod. Instead, I decided to take the picture anyway, holding the camera and moving it on purpose. Got really cool pictures with circular movements, back and forth movements, even drew a question mark by mistake one time. Got some really cool photos out of it. I took that one step further, and the next time I actually brought my tripod and still did movements that had a much more controlled, smoother movement. Just curious if you've ever discovered some creative ways of doing things by mistake, and give us some tips. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah. I mean, this is the really fun thing about photography, especially the moment you go digital, which at one point I did, and it gave me so much freedom to experiment, so much freedom to just try out what happens because it didn't cost anything anymore. So yeah, motion is really important. Motion is a thing that you can freeze, that you can work with, that you can include. I had photos where someone, but like a long exposure of a tripod of a building in a relatively dark setting, where someone walked into the shot and then all of a sudden I had a ghost in the shot, which was really interesting. You moving that camera during the fireworks, hey, that's how creativity works, right? You have that knowledge about something that you can do with moving the camera, and then you forget your tripod, and then you just play and see what happens. We had that at one point in Moscow last year when we were at a place that was kind of cool, but then I saw all these interesting lights around it, and I had a similar experience where I moved the camera by accident during a long exposure, and then I saw what those lights were doing on the photo. So we did a bit of camera tossing, like holding the camera at its strap and then just tossing it in the air during a longer 1 second exposure, and that gives very organic and interesting shapes, and some of those photos are really, really interesting. I still love them a lot. One thing I've seen a while ago is someone zooming their camera during exposing fireworks. Like you do a 20-second exposure of fireworks and you slowly zoom the camera in or out or fast and just see what that does. It makes for some interesting results. I also had a discovery in post-processing with Lightroom. A while ago, I had some very low contrast images of trees in fog from Hokkaido, from Japan. And I found out that if I applied a lot of noise reduction, which makes those pictures very painterly, very almost like they're wrapped in plastic, and then added some strong sharpening, and I had to play with the radius of the sharpening and experimented with that. That gave a really interesting effect that really looked very, very painterly and really created these, I don't know, for lack of a better word, webbings between the tree branches. Very interesting effect. I love this a lot. Another thing that I did with video, that years ago when I did the invisible camera thing together with Alan Attridge, we were trying to make video shots of a stationary object more interesting, and we were looking at moving the camera, but that is one way to do it, kind of to make it a bit more interesting. But then almost by accident, we noticed that if you move the light sources instead of the cameras, you put the camera on a tripod and then move the light sources that light that object, that creates a different kind of motion, plays with the reflections and with the shadows. So that was really, really interesting. And last but not least, the one thing that I've been experimenting with lately again, I did this before, but now just came back to it, is freelancing. Yeah, it's taking the lens off the camera and leaving a gap between the camera and the lens. And that changes a few things. It's like a ring, like an extension tube that will, you take the camera away from the camera, you take the lens away from the camera, you create that gap, and that that makes the minimum focus distance much closer. You can get much closer to things and get some interesting macros, but then you also get to tilt that lens and create a different kind of focal plane through the picture, and that is like a tilt shift lens almost. And it's really fun to experiment with these kind of things. Of course, if you're afraid of getting dust in your camera, then sometimes you have to be a bit more brave to do that. In my case, I used a special filter that you can put on the front of the camera to avoid it getting dust inside and still be able to do that. Freelancing things. You can shoot with regular magnifying glasses this way. You get really interesting results that way. So experimentation, Doug, is fun, and I'm glad you did it, and I'm very happy that you got your creative firework results. And that was it for this episode of Tips on the Top Floor. If you want your questions answered on the show, or if you want to comment on anything I said here, or correct me on stuff, or tell the listeners something cool you found out, record it in any voice memo app on your phone and send it to voice@tfttf.com. That's voice@tfttf.com. Do it right now. Just, stop the press. Do it right now. Record what's on your mind right now. Send it to voice@tfttf.com. I want to hear from you.
That you said it ain't as easy as it seems. Makes it easier to leave it all behind. Don't matter where you go.
Hey, and thanks everyone who's left an iTunes rating or review. Thank you so much for that. You're really helping the show be seen by more people by giving it a bit more exposure this way. Let's keep this community growing. You help make this happen, and I really thank you for that.
It's all a question of faith.
Music for the show by Jeff Smith, silent partner in Hans-Peter Kagrud, publishing by Release Pixie, Matt Rossiter. Armstead Slack invitations handled by our CIO, Russ.
You there be sunshine after rain.
My name is Chris Marquardt. Follow me on Facebook or on Twitter at Chris Marquardt, Chris Marquardt. And of course, go out and take amazing photos, be nice to each other, and happy shooting.